Olivia Hartman was the kind of CEO who ruled the business world with an iron heart. At just 36, she owned skyscrapers in Manhattan, flew private jets like taxis, and was feared across boardrooms for her ruthless efficiency. To her competitors, she was untouchable. To her employees, she was ice. And to herself, she was certain nothing could ever shake her empire. Until that night, it was past midnight when Olivia's limousine rolled quietly into the long driveway of her glass-walled mansion. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her staff believed she was still in Tokyo, sealing another billion-dollar deal, but exhaustion and an unshakable gut feeling drove her back home without a word. The house should have been silent, dark, empty. But as Olivia stepped barefoot across the marble floor, a faint melody floated through the air. Not the polished strings of her gala concerts. No, this was something softer. A French lullaby, haunting and delicate, drifting from the west wing. Her pulse quickened. Who was in her home? She moved swiftly, heels in hand, following the sound, and then she froze. On her priceless Persian rug, in the glow of a single lamp, stood Miguel Alvarez, the janitor she barely knew. A man who usually vanished into the background, but he wasn't cleaning. He was holding a little girl, rocking her gently in his arms, humming that lullaby with trembling lips. For the first time in years, Olivia's perfect world cracked, and she realized this night was about to change everything. Olivia Hartman had built her life around precision. Flights were timed down to the minute. Deals were calculated to the decimal. Every move, every word, every smile she ever allowed herself in public had been rehearsed, scripted, and sharpened like a weapon. But for the first time in years, Olivia broke her own rule. She trusted her gut. Her Tokyo trip had been flawless, on paper, a 3-day marathon of back-to-back negotiations with foreign investors, punctuated by champagne toasts and polite bows. Another skyscraper added to her portfolio, another billion-dollar empire under her signature. Her staff expected her to stay in Japan for another week to finalize details. She even told them she would. But as Olivia sat in her penthouse hotel suite, surrounded by crystal glasses and unread contracts, a gnawing unease crept into her chest. Jet lag couldn't explain it. It was heavier, darker, like a shadow whispering in her ear. She couldn't shake it. At 2 a.m., she made a decision no one saw coming. Book the jet, she told her assistant coldly. When he reminded her of her calendar, she cut him off with one word: cancel. Hours later, her Gulfstream descended into the glowing midnight skyline of New York. The city pulsed with sleepless energy. But Olivia's mind was elsewhere. She gave no notice to her staff, no instructions to her security detail. Not even her driver knew until the last second where they were heading. She wanted silence. She wanted secrecy. The limousine glided up the winding road to her Hudson River estate, the glass mansion that had been photographed for magazines but rarely lived in. Olivia's empire was public. Her home, ironically, was not. It was almost 1 a.m. when the gates parted and the car rolled to a stop. The house loomed ahead, cold, sleek, and dark, like a crystal tomb. She dismissed the driver with a flick of her hand, stepped out with heels in hand, and inhaled the sharp bite of the night air. For once, she wanted to hear the sound of her own footsteps. The front doors opened to a silence so deep it pressed against her eardrums. No staff waiting, no lights burning, just the vast emptiness of marble floors and towering windows, reflecting the moonlight like shards of ice. It was exactly how she had left it. And then something shifted. Olivia froze mid-step. At first, she thought she was imagining it, a trick of exhaustion. But no, it was real. Music, soft, distant, unmistakable. Her brow furrowed as she turned toward the west wing. The sound floated like smoke, curling through the halls. It wasn't the crisp strings of a chamber orchestra, not the refined notes of a piano concerto. Olivia knew those sounds. They were her world, her stage. This was different. It was older, sadder, fragile. A lullaby. The melody was French, the words faint but familiar enough to send a shiver down her spine. She remembered hearing it once, decades ago, When she was a child and her mother played foreign records late at night, trying to soothe Olivia to sleep in their cramped apartment. That was a lifetime ago, long before the towers of glass, long before her name was printed on Forbes covers. And yet, here it was, drifting through her mansion, her grip tightened around the stiletto heels in her hand. Instinct screamed that she wasn't alone. Each step toward the West Wing echoed louder than the last, bouncing off the cold walls. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from fury. Someone was in her home. Someone had breached the one place she never shared, never opened, and they dared to fill it with this haunting sound. The closer she got, the clearer it became. A voice, low and trembling, hummed along with the record. A man's voice. Olivia's pulse quickened. Her empire had been attacked before, by lawsuits, betrayals, even assassination threats, but never like this, never in her sanctuary. She pressed her palm against the carved oak door of the lounge, the faint glow of a single lamp spilling through the crack. She inhaled once, sharp and steady, and pushed it open, and that was when her entire world cracked in half. The door creaked open, and Olivia Hartman, queen of glass towers and cold boardrooms, stopped breathing. There, on the center of her priceless Persian rug, was Miguel Alvarez, the janitor she had barely acknowledged in 7 years. A man so silent in the background of her empire that she could not recall ever speaking more than a handful of words to him. But now, he was no shadow. He was the center of the room. Miguel stood hunched but steady, arms cradling a child no more than 4 years old. The little girl's faded pink dress was worn at the hem, her hair tousled as though brushed by exhaustion itself. Her cheek rested against his chest, her breath small and even, syncing perfectly with the rhythm of his lullaby. And Miguel, this invisible man, wasn't sweeping floors, wasn't carrying buckets, wasn't disappearing into hallways as usual. He was rocking her, his body swaying gently, his lips trembling as they formed the words of a French lullaby that drifted like a ghost through the room. Olivia's nails dug into her palm. This was her fortress, her sanctuary, the one place where no one was supposed to exist except her. And yet here he was, singing to a child. Her first instinct was rage. How dare he? How dare this janitor invade her home? But before she could act, something inside her shifted. Because Miguel's face, creased, weathered, eyes glistening under the lamplight, was not the face of an intruder. It was the face of a man carrying the weight of the world, clinging desperately to the only thing left that mattered. The girl stirred slightly in his arms, and Miguel lowered his voice, his hand stroking her hair with the fragile tenderness of someone terrified she might vanish if he let go. He whispered the last line of the lullaby like a prayer. And then, as if fate had scripted the moment, he turned. Their eyes met. Miguel froze. His swaying stopped. For a heartbeat, the room was silent except for the faint scratching of the record spinning in the corner. The little girl shifted again, and Miguel, almost panicking, lowered her carefully onto a pillow on the sofa. His hands shook as he tucked her in with a blanket, moving with the nervous precision of a man who knew his life had just been shattered. Finally, he straightened, standing rigid before Olivia, his lips parted, but for seconds nothing came. And then, his voice, quiet, broken, filled the air. "Miss Hartman, I didn't know you were here." His throat worked as he swallowed. "I can explain." Olivia didn't answer. She didn't even blink. She simply stared. At him, at the girl, at the scene that didn't belong in her world. Miguel's eyes flicked down, then back up, filled with shame. "She's my granddaughter," he said, each word a struggle. "Her mother, my daughter, passed away last month. Cancer." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. We lost the house last week. I had nowhere to go. I've been sleeping in the maintenance room. With her." The words hung heavy in the vast silence of the mansion. Olivia felt her chest tighten. She wanted to dismiss it, to cut him down, to reassert her control. But she couldn't, because in that moment, she saw not a janitor, not an employee, not an intruder. She saw a grandfather, a man on the edge of despair, holding on to hope through the fragile body of a child. The irony stung her like ice. The woman who owned skyscrapers, who bought islands, who could erase entire departments with a single signature, stood powerless in the face of a man's love for his granddaughter. Miguel lowered his gaze, tears catching the dim light. I cleaned. I made sure nothing upstairs was touched. I swear, Miss Hartman, I just needed somewhere safe for her. Olivia's lips parted, but no words came. The air was heavy with something unfamiliar, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. It wasn't anger, it was empathy. And in that split second, Olivia Hartman, Ice Queen of Wall Street, felt her empire tremble. Miguel's hands were trembling so hard they looked as though they might shatter. His chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, the weight of years pressing down on his back. He had been invisible for so long, blending into the background of Olivia Hartman's empire, but at this moment there was no place to hide. His lips quivered as he finally spoke. Her name is Isabella. The sound of it cracked in the air, fragile, breaking like glass against Olivia's silence. Miguel's eyes darted toward the child, still asleep on the couch, her small chest rising with each innocent breath. He swallowed hard, his throat raw, and continued, "She's my granddaughter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My daughter, her mother. She passed away last month. Cancer." The word hung between them, poisonous and cruel. Cancer, a single word that explained the hollow look in his eyes, the grief stitched into every line of his face. Miguel's shoulders sagged as if even speaking had drained him. "After she died, we tried to keep the house, but the bills," his voice cracked. "We lost it. We lost everything." He squeezed his eyes shut, tears slipping out despite his efforts to hold them back. "I had nowhere else to take her. No family, no friends who could keep a child. I couldn't let her sleep on the streets." His voice rose, desperate now. "So I brought her here, to the only place I knew was warm, the maintenance room. I made it clean. I made sure nothing upstairs was ever touched. I worked every shift, every floor. Like always. I didn't want to take anything. I just needed somewhere safe for her." His chest heaved, the confession spilling out faster than he could contain it. "I'm sorry. Miss Hartman, I never meant disrespect. I know this is your home. I know I don't belong here, but she's all I have left. Isabella she's everything." His gaze fell to the ground, shame dripping from every syllable. His hands twisted together, rough from years of scrubbing floors and polishing marble, hands that had never held power, only labor, only sacrifice. Olivia's mouth was dry. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, to tell him to leave. But the words stuck, because the sight before her wasn't an act of defiance, it was survival. Miguel raised his head again, tears streaking down his weathered cheeks. "For 7 years I swept your halls. 7 years I emptied trash no one noticed. 7 years I never asked for a raise, never asked for mercy. But now," his voice broke, "now I have no choice. I just wanted to keep her safe. That's all. Please believe me." The record player in the corner crackled, the lullaby ending in a soft hiss of static. The silence that followed was heavier than steel. Olivia's heart pounded, but not with fury, with something else, something she had buried deep. She looked at Isabella, so small, so fragile. Curled up under the blanket, the innocence on her face was a stark contrast to the empire of glass and steel Olivia had built around herself. And then Miguel whispered the final truth. "I would give up my life before I let anything happen to her." The words sliced through Olivia like a blade, because for all her billions, her jets, her towers, she realized she had never loved anything that fiercely, not in years, not since she was a little girl herself. Her vision blurred, not from anger, but from memory, the faint echo of her own childhood when another janitor, another forgotten man, had once opened his attic to her family in their darkest hour. She had buried that story beneath contracts and profit margins. But now, staring at Miguel and Isabella, it came roaring back. Olivia Hartman, the Ice Queen of Wall Street, stood in her living room paralyzed, not by a crime, but by a truth so raw it ripped through her armor. Miguel wasn't just a janitor, he was a grandfather, a protector, a man who had already lost everything and refused to lose one more soul. And in that confession, Olivia felt her empire tremble again. Olivia stood frozen, Miguel's broken confession still echoing in the cavernous room. She wanted to dismiss it, to shove it into the same vault where she had locked every inconvenient truth. But something inside her cracked wide open. His words, his tears, pulled at a memory she had buried so deep she almost forgot it had ever happened. And then it hit her. She was 5 years old again. The empire, the skyscrapers, the luxury, none of it existed. Instead, there was a tiny apartment on the Lower East Side. The smell of stale bread, the clatter of overdue bills tossed onto a kitchen table, the sound of her mother crying softly behind a closed door, muffling her sobs so Olivia wouldn't hear. But she did. She always did. Her father had lost his job. Overnight, the man she thought was invincible collapsed under the weight of failure. The rent went unpaid, and within weeks, they were evicted. Olivia could still see the landlord's face, stone cold as he handed them the notice. She could still hear the rain that night as they carried their few belongings into the street. They had nowhere to go. She remembered the panic in her father's eyes as he gripped her tiny hand, her mother clutching a suitcase with trembling fingers. And then, like an angel stepping out of the shadows, there was Mr. Bernard, the janitor at her father's office. He had seen her father's despair. He had listened quietly as her parents pleaded, and without hesitation, he had whispered 6 words that would burn themselves into Olivia's soul. "You can stay in my attic." Olivia remembered climbing the narrow staircase to the dusty attic above Bernard's small row house. The ceilings were low, the floor creaked, and the mattress was little more than springs and cloth. But it was warm. It was safe. For 3 weeks, that cramped attic was their entire world. Her mother wept in gratitude every night, whispering prayers of thanks. Her father, once proud and unshakable, bowed his head to the janitor who had given them shelter, and Olivia, 5 years old, wide-eyed, sat at the window, staring at the stars through a crack in the roof and wondering why a man who swept floors had more kindness than the people in suits who had turned them away. It was Bernard who brought them food. Bernard who fixed the leaking roof with his own calloused hands. Bernard who told her father, "Dignity isn't in a paycheck, it's in how you care for your family." Those words had carved themselves into her memory, but as Olivia grew, she buried them under ambition. When her father finally found work again and they moved out, she swore to herself she would never be powerless like that. She would never cry over eviction notices, she would never beg for shelter. So she hardened. Every deal, every cold dismissal of employees, every calculated move was a brick in the wall she built to protect herself from ever being that vulnerable child again. She told herself kindness was weakness, compassion was a luxury only the poor could afford. But now, staring at Miguel, seeing Isabella's fragile body wrapped in a blanket, it all came rushing back. The attic, the kindness, the truth she had run from her entire life. Her throat tightened. For the first time in years, her armor felt heavy, suffocating. She realized the very thing that had once saved her, the kindness of a janitor, was the very thing she had abandoned in her climb to the top. And in that moment, Olivia Hartman, billionaire CEO, queen of ice and steel, felt the walls of her empire tremble because she finally remembered she had been Isabella once, and without Bernard, she might never have survived. The mansion was silent at dawn. Pale light crept through the glass walls, painting the marble floors in shades of gray. Miguel Alvarez stood in the foyer with a worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His granddaughter Isabella clinging to his leg, half asleep. His face was set, weary but resigned. He had made his choice. He would leave before Olivia Hartman woke up. He couldn't risk it. She was a billionaire CEO, a woman feared in boardrooms around the world. What chance did a janitor have against her wrath? No matter how gentle her silence had been the night before, Miguel knew the inevitable. He would be fired. And worse, his granddaughter might be thrown into the streets with him. He kissed Isabella's hair and whispered, "Come on, mi niña, we'll find somewhere else." His voice cracked as he pulled the door open. "Where do you think you're going?" The words cut through the air like a blade. Miguel froze. Slowly, he turned. There stood Olivia Hartman on the grand staircase, draped in a gray silk robe, her hair tied back in a loose bun. She held a steaming cup of coffee, her eyes sharp, unblinking, and impossibly cold. For a moment, Miguel felt like a criminal caught in the act. I thought you'd want us gone," he stammered. His hand tightened around Isabella's small fingers. Olivia descended the staircase one measured step at a time, her heels clicking against marble. "You thought wrong," she said. Miguel swallowed hard. "Please, Miss Hartman, I never meant—" "What's her name?" Olivia interrupted, her tone cutting but steady. Miguel blinked, caught off guard. "Isabella," he whispered. "She just turned 4. Olivia paused at the bottom step, her gaze flicking to the little girl who peeked shyly from behind Miguel's leg. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Then Olivia set down her coffee cup on a side table, her voice softer but no less commanding. "The guest suite downstairs, fresh linens, private bathroom. You and Isabella will move in there by noon." Miguel's eyes widened, disbelief washing over him. What are you saying?" "I'm saying you no longer work as a janitor," Olivia replied. "As of today, you are the caretaker of this house and of her." She nodded toward Isabella. "You'll be paid properly, with benefits, with dignity." Miguel's lips trembled. "Miss Hartman, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay." Her words carried the weight of command, but also something else. Something Miguel had never expected from her. A plea. His eyes filled with tears. He knelt, holding Isabella close, as if to shield her from the surreal turn of events. But Isabella's small voice broke the silence. "Abuelo, does this mean we can stay here?" Miguel choked back a sob and nodded. "Yes, mi corazón, yes, we can." Olivia's face softened, just for a fraction of a second. "This house has 12 bedrooms," she murmured with a bitter smile, "and not one soul who gives me a good night hug. Maybe it's time that changed." Miguel lowered his head, overwhelmed. He had swept floors, scrubbed marble, and emptied trash for 7 years without asking for more than his wages. Now, in the span of minutes, his life and his granddaughter's had been rewritten. From that morning forward, the mansion was no longer a tomb of glass. Isabella's laughter began to echo through its halls, breaking the silence that once defined Olivia's existence. Miguel worked harder than ever, not because he feared losing his job, but because he felt he finally had a home worth protecting. And Olivia Hartman, for the first time in her adult life, began to understand what true power looked like. It wasn't in contracts or stock prices. It was in the fragile trust of a child and the quiet loyalty of a man who had nothing left to give, except love. The Hartman mansion had always been a monument to silence. 12 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, but not a single echo of laughter. Not a single whisper of love. For years, Olivia Hartman had walked through its halls, hearing nothing but her own footsteps, the lonely rhythm of an empire built on ice. But that changed the moment Isabella's laughter filled the air. It started small, like a bell ringing in the distance, the sound of a 4-year-old chasing sunlight across the marble floors, her tiny shoes tapping out a melody of innocence. Then came Miguel's low chuckle as he carried her on his shoulders, pointing out the birds nesting outside the window. Slowly, the mansion began to breathe again, and Olivia, who had built her identity around coldness, began to thaw. She canceled meetings, entire trips to London and Hong Kong, abandoned with a single phone call. "Reschedule," she told her assistant. When pressed for reasons, she offered none, because she didn't owe anyone an explanation. For the first time in her career, she didn't care what the board thought. At 5 in the evening, instead of sitting in a penthouse conference room surrounded by men twice her age, she was at home. She was kneeling on the floor with Isabella, helping her build towers out of wooden blocks. And when those towers toppled, Olivia laughed, not the polite, calculated laugh she had mastered for networking, but a raw, unguarded laugh that startled even her. Her staff noticed. Her executives whispered. Something was different about the Ice Queen. She no longer stayed late at the office. She no longer barked at minor mistakes. She began asking questions like, "How's your family?" and waiting for an answer. For the first time, her empire felt human. But the biggest transformation was inside Olivia herself. Every night, she would stand outside Isabella's room, listening as Miguel tucked the girl into bed. The lullabies still floated through the air, sometimes French, sometimes Spanish, and each note dug deeper into Olivia's chest. She remembered nights when her own father had lost everything, when a janitor's kindness had saved them from the streets. She remembered being 5 years old, clutching her mother's hand, terrified, and now, standing in her glass mansion, she realized she had become the very woman she once despised, unreachable, untouchable, alone. Until Isabella. One night, Isabella slipped her small hand into Olivia's and asked, "Will you be here tomorrow?" The question shattered her. No shareholder had ever shaken her the way that child's voice did. Olivia knelt down, her throat tight, and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart, I'll be here." And for once, it wasn't a promise she made to close a deal. It was a promise she intended to keep. Days turned into weeks. Olivia began to look forward to evenings at home more than boardroom victories. She stopped measuring her success in stock prices and started measuring it in bedtime hugs. Her empire was still thriving, but for the first time, it wasn't her only identity. Miguel noticed too. One evening, he found Olivia sitting quietly in the lounge, watching Isabella draw with crayons on the Persian rug. She wasn't holding a laptop, wasn't scrolling through financial reports. She was simply watching, her lips curved in a soft smile. "You've changed, Miss Hartman," Miguel said gently. Olivia's eyes flickered toward him, then back to the child. "Maybe I finally remembered who I was," she murmured. The mansion no longer felt like a tomb. It was alive, messy, noisy, unpredictable, but alive. And Olivia Hartman, once a symbol of ruthless ambition, had discovered a truth more powerful than any contract, that love, once lost, could be found again in the most unexpected places. And it was that truth, not her billions, that finally made her human. The boardroom had never been this silent. Olivia Hartman stood at the head of the table, her empire's titans watching, expecting another ruthless decree. Instead, she pointed to Miguel Alvarez, standing quietly in the back, little Isabella perched on his lap. "You wonder why this company is thriving?" Her voice trembled but carried fire. "It's not strategy. It's not numbers. It's kindness. I lost it once, but they reminded me what built this place." The room erupted. Executives rose to their feet. Applause thundered, not for profits, but for a janitor's love and a CEO's reclaimed humanity. Rama Cold CEO to a woman reborn by kindness. Olivia's story proves love changes everything. Like, share, and subscribe for more heart-stirring stories.